Hello everyone, and welcome to Retrospective Rant. I'm your host, Joey Huff, and this is the first episode of both the podcast, as well as our first series, 90s Hits. Yep, in that seemingly distant time, right at the cusp of the new millennium, where the United States of America shifted from its post-war and post-Soviet jubilation into, something else. But there's many a good piece of media that's from the 90s, and today we're going to talk about a little-known sports classic that entertained many a growing boy with adventures of a summer in 1962. That movie is The Sandlot. Now, I remember watching this movie when I was 10 years old, maybe a little younger, and I thought it was the greatest movie that was ever made. But now, after being exposed to the wonders of Shakespeare and reading classics made by literary masters of the same caliber, yeah, I still like The Sandlot. It's a pretty good movie. Sure, it's not a dramatic art piece or some hard-hitting coming-of-age drama. It's just a comedy about a bunch of kids growing up in and playing baseball in the titular Sandlot. And that's what makes it good. Well, I've said the movie's title twice now, I might as well get started talking about it. Our adventure begins with a narration, which plays over some dude revealed to be the main character as he sets up his workspace in a baseball stadium. This opening narration concerns baseball legend Babe Ruth and his defining moment where he called his shot at the end of the 1932 World Series and made it. This introduction serves a wonderful purpose in cementing Babe Ruth as a key plot point in the story entire, as well as the function of baseball and its place in the consciousness of our past. And it also functions as a perfect tie-in to this movie's own legend, Benny Rodriguez. And shortly after Benny is mentioned, the movie transitions into that aforementioned summer of 1962, right into a baseball game featuring Benny's skills, specifically his speed, as well as his instincts, his tactical skill for how to play. And yeah, this scene works too. You get to see Benny in action, you get to see how the neighborhood does in fact prop him up as a kind of local celebrity, and there's even a little slow-motion moment where you get a good look at the footwork that he makes consistent use of throughout the story entire. Once that's all done, we go over to our real main character, Scotty Smalls. Now, where Benny has been hyped up and even shown to be the greatest thing ever, Smalls is introduced to us right away as an awkward and rather small kid. Even the narration, which is given by an older Smalls, expands on this. He's not just the new kid in town, he's the new kid in the entire state. So he doesn't have any friends, and he doesn't have any idea how to make any. We also get a shot of his home life, where we find out that Smalls' biological father died some time ago, and that his mom married his stepdad about a year before the Sandlot movie gets started. The narration is quick to tell us that Smalls is having a tough time getting used to his stepdad and vice versa, but even without that, we probably figure that out in the scene itself. Bill is played by Dennis Leary, and we get introduced to him when Smalls walks into his office, which is filled to the brim with baseball trophies, equipment, all sorts of souvenirs. So Bill is obviously a huge fan of the game, and so Smalls asks him if he could teach him how to play catch, and Bill is nice enough to say yes, and this scene is good for a few reasons, actually. First, we get to see some very good and very awkward interaction between Smalls and Bill. This is compounded by how Smalls repeatedly calls Bill by his first name rather than Dad or even Sir or anything like that. We also get to see the film's MacGuffin, which is a signed baseball that Bill holds in a place of honor above all the rest of his various souvenirs and trophies. We even get a little shot that shows us that the ball is in fact signed by Babe Ruth himself. Now, on to the next scene, and Smalls is running out the door to try and make some friends. He's even found a group who play baseball at a local and somewhat rundown field called, you guessed it, the Sandlot. But, to Smalls, this is the greatest place he's ever seen, and the kids playing at the field are likewise hyped up as being really good at the game and something special. This neatly gives us the first obstacle that Smalls needs to overcome in the movie, as well as just how hard it's going to be for him to do so. He even mentions his crappy plastic baseball glove as the only equipment he has. But there's only 8 kids on the team, so they must need a 9th player, and Smalls hopes he can get in. He doesn't. He tries to get into the game, and he falls over, he throws bad, he trips, and he eventually runs away from the very embarrassing situation. The guys are, of course, laughing at him, all except for Benny, who seems to be taking pity on the new kid. We also get a brief introduction to some kind of monster on the other side of a fence in some random backyard. We don't see what the monster is, but when Smalls goes over to the fence to pick up a ball he dropped, something on the other side of that fence growls, and it is so mighty that it shakes the entire construction. But that pales in comparison to the next scene, in which it is revealed that Smalls is in fact the son of Indiana Jones. It's a joke, because Smalls' mom is played by Karen Allen, who is Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that other non-existent sequel. It's a very funny joke. Anyway, Mom tells Smalls that he needs to be braver and to get out there and make some friends. Now, in these kind of childhood adventure movies, this would be seen as a pretty derivative and standard "Mom wants the best for you" speech. But upon watching this movie in current time, it's rather refreshing. The whole follow your heart no matter what trope was already starting to crop up in, well, most kids' movies, and now it pervades everything made today. So, this monologue from Smalls' mom is definitely encouraging, like you'd expect from any nice parent, but she also tells him that he needs to toughen up a little bit. He needs to get over his insecurities and make some friends so he doesn't become a shut-in, which is vaguely troubling in today's current climate, but despite its derivative nature, the scene functions well in the story. And we also get a look at what Smalls usually likes to do in his free time, which is to tinker with an erector set. And for those of you who don't know what that is, erector is just, well, it's just the building toys that kids used to play with before Lego. The point is that we set up the erector set because it becomes important later in the movie. The next day comes along, and Mom asks Smalls if Bill said yes. Meaning, did he say yes to teaching Smalls catch? The kid, of course, doesn't quite have the courage to ask Bill again point blank, but Mom encourages him along. And I do mean encourages him. She prompts Smalls to ask him all on his own, which is good parenting, and Bill responds yes, but when his work is less hectic. And that's a pretty typical answer, and one that Smalls readily accepts. That is until Mom asks Bill to go out and teach him today, even giving him a "please for me" type of face, and Bill takes Smalls outside to teach them catch. Now, we already know that Smalls doesn't know anything about how to play, and we get to see even more of that here. At one point, he just decides to run the ball up to Bill and hand it to him instead of throwing it. What I do like about this scene, though, besides Smalls humiliating himself again, and that is funny, is that we establish that Bill is not a jerk parent. He is in fact very patient with Smalls and tries to teach him the basics of the game as best as he is able, even though you can clearly see that the man is getting frustrated. Of course, the session doesn't work out because Smalls gets a fastball to his eyes and gets a black eye. Also, his trashy plastic glove is, well, it's trashed now. Feeling defeated and pretty down about his life, Smalls decides to sulk a little in his front yard. Until Benny comes over, yeah, I forgot to mention that they're neighbors, and encourages Smalls to give it another go. Even gives the kid a spare glove so that he can continue playing. And with that bit of encouragement, they go off to join the rest of the Sandlot team at the local drugstore. And for those of you who don't know, it's just the ye olde equivalent of a convenience store or gas station ancillary complex type of thing. Now, when we get there, one of the other kids is trying to do an impression of Babe Ruth, and using the player's nickname, the Great Bambino. And Smalls, in a totally benign fashion, asks, "Who's that?" This puts the entire team in a state of shock, so much so that even Benny looks a little embarrassed to be standing next to Smalls. The situation isn't helped by the fact that when they try and say who the Great Bambino is, they just cite more of Babe Ruth's nicknames. So, like any other kid who doesn't want to look like a complete moron, Smalls says, of course he knows who the Great Bambino is, and yeah, the guys don't care enough to spot check him on it. And it's at this point that we get an introduction to the team entire. First, there are the brothers Timmy and Tommy Timmons. Their only trait is that Tommy repeats everything that Timmy says, so you might remember who they are by the end of the movie, if you care enough. Next up is Mike Squints Palladorus, who for the remainder of this review I'm going to exclusively refer to as the best, and you will soon find out why. Next up is Alan McLennan. People just call him Yeah, because he says yeah all the time. He also has maybe the most guts out of everyone in the group, aside from Benny himself. Again, that's something that's demonstrated later in the movie. Next up is Bertram, who's an idiot, but not till the end of the movie. Then there's Kenny DeNunez, whose single defining trait is that he has no defining traits. He's the most normal kid in the whole team. And finally, we have Hamilton Ham Porter. He's a bigger kid, but he's also a loudmouth and a trash talker who takes no crap from anybody. And thus, he is the funniest character and third most badass guy on the team. This whole sequence is just your basic, here are the characters in the movie exposition scene. But even then, there's a few special moments. The big one is that Babe Ruth is brought up again, and in such a way that we are reminded that it will be an issue in the coming story. The other funny part about this is that each of the guys spits on the ground once they're introduced by Benny, just like you'd see in the lineup for maybe a Western buddy movie. The only problem is that these are a bunch of 11 to 13-year-olds trying to do that, so it's not at all badass. In fact, a few of them have trouble just spitting at all. And it's pretty funny. So, with our roster down, we go to their first actual game. And the team isn't at all thrilled with Smalls, and he actually validates their annoyance entirely. Once more, he can't catch, he can't throw, and just like he did with Bill, he runs the ball over to one of the other guys instead of just throwing it. But Benny comes to the rescue. He coaches Smalls with some bare basics on how to throw, and manages to bat the ball directly into Smalls' glove, just to show that the kid actually can catch, albeit with some help. This is enough to win the team over, and Smalls is able to secure their affection. Ham even talks about meeting later for more baseball lessons when they all start walking back home. Benny also gives Smalls an actual baseball cap, and even recommends that Smalls toss his junky one in the fireplace. Kind of as a joke. Next scene, and the team is playing again, and Ham, who makes the most Babe Ruth references out of anybody in the movie, actually calls out his own shot when he's up to bat, and makes it on his second try. sending it right into the backyard we saw from earlier. This pisses off the rest of the team, and Ham, of course, trolls them all by making a full home run, even as they cuss him out and throw their gloves at him. Smalls doesn't know what the big deal is, and he just tells everyone that he'll go over the fence and get the ball. And that's perfectly reasonable. It's at that moment that the Best sees Smalls climbing over the fence and gives one of the best reactions I've ever seen in any movie ever. I mean, his eyes are bulging out of his face, his mouth is hanging open, it's wonderful, it's great. And this, of course, prompts the rest of the team to race over in abject terror and tear Smalls away from the fence. Because apparently, there's a monster on the other side of that fence, referred to only as the Beast. They even decide to have a camp-out for the express purpose of filling Smalls in on the gritty details about the Beast, just because it's that important in the neighborhood. And the Best tells the story of how the Beast was brought in to be a guard dog for a junkyard owner named Mr. Myrtle. And we get a pretty typical campfire horror story about how the Beast grew into a monster that killed innocents and bad guys, so much so that the police had to get involved. They even told Myrtle to lock the Beast up in his backyard forever. Now, like I said, this is a textbook example of a fireside horror story, right to the point where the Best actually brings a flashlight to shine under his face to give off horror story vibes. They are so scared of this monster that when Smalls looks over the side into the yard, the Beast growls and all the team shrinks away from the window. They even clutch their baseball bats and BB guns for protection. It's amazing. They even mention a kid who apparently got eaten by the Beast. Now, when you were a kid and you watch this scene, or at least if you're a younger kid, you'll probably get swept up in the story just like Smalls does. When you actually grow a brain, though, you start to see some pretty obvious indications that this tall tale is literally just that. The story is even shown in old horror movie black and white, and the Best opens up the story completely unsure of when it all actually happens. And once those stakes have been established, we transition over to the drugstore when the Best and Yeah are walking out of the drugstore with the new ball so they can play again, only to see the hottest girl in the neighborhood, Wendy Peppercorn, walking down the same street. Now, both boys are completely frozen in their tracks just by looking at her, but it's clear that the Best does in fact have it the worst. Yeah even gives him a bunch of crap for that once they bring the ball to the rest of the team on the Sandlot. There's just one hiccup, though. It's way too hot to play right now. They say that it's 150 degrees outside, and I'm pretty sure that's just hyperbole, but it's at least close to 100, and I wouldn't want to walk in that, let alone play ball in that kind of weather. Benny is of course disappointed by this, and he tries to goad the team into playing by saying,
"Vote then. Anybody who wants to be a can't hack it panty waist who wears their mama's bra, raise your hand."
And of course, the whole team raises their hands because they just don't want to play. And that's pretty funny. Benny is still annoyed with this and asks what they're going to do for the day if not play ball. To which the rest of the team, except for Smalls, say, "Scam pool honeys." Which, for those of you who think that's an alien language, translates into, "Go to the pool and find hot girls." This lesson in advanced linguistics has now concluded. Now, before terms like toxic masculinity are thrown around, I have 2 points to make. One, they're kids, leave them alone. These are a bunch of 11 to 13-year-olds who are just now starting to view girls as something other than an alien creature. They don't know any of the more complicated crap, let alone anything bad or horrible. So their bravado is totally expected and natural. The second point, which builds off the first one, is that the narration comes in again once they're at the pool, and point blank says that the kids don't actually go to the pool for the girls. The narrator even says that if any of these girls actually walked up to any of the teammates, then each one would have probably just peed their pants in fear. Why would they do that? Because they're nervous, awkward kids. It's also quickly established that one of the main draws to the pool is Wendy Peppercorn, the hot girl from earlier, because she is in fact the lifeguard at the pool. And yeah, she does have it going on, and she isn't at all ashamed of that. So good for her. The best, of course, can't take this anymore, and goes off the deep end. No, he literally just dives into the deep end of the pool, even though he can't swim. This sends the team into a panic, and Wendy actually dives in to save the best from drowning. And then we're treated to a very tense and dramatic scene. She pulls him out of the water, he's non-responsive, the rest of the guys are scared out of their minds that he's dead, and yeah, the best is totally faking the whole thing. And when Wendy comes in for another round of CPR, the best pulls her in for the kiss, right as This Magic Moment by Benny King starts playing. Now the guys know that what the best did was a pretty scummy thing to do.
Oh man, he's a deep shit!
And Wendy, who's taller than the best by a whole 1.5 feet, if not a bit more, drags his skinny ass out of the pool and tosses him into the street. Not on the pavement, but on the grass, and it still gets her point across. The boys are, of course, banned from the pool, which, according to the narration, encompasses forever, and the scene ends with the narration of Wendy probably just a little impressed by the chutzpah of the best, who is again a tiny child, now gives him a smile when he and the rest of the team pass by the pool. Once that's done, we get treated to what is at the same time my favorite scene in the movie, but possibly the most superfluous one as well. The guys have a night game at the Sandlot because it's the 4th of July, and the fireworks will light up the sky just enough to make them feel like they're having a real game at a full stadium. The narration uses this as an opportunity to cement that the whole team thinks of baseball as just a fun game and pastime, all except for Benny, for whom the game's life. We even get a visual testament to this when Benny bats up and manages to make an uncontested run all the way to home plate because the others are just too enraptured by the fireworks. To add on to all of this, America the Beautiful plays while the action happens. Specifically, the version by Ray Charles, which is deservedly held in the Grammy Hall of Fame. Do yourself a favor and listen to more Ray Charles. This scene probably wouldn't have hit me as hard as it did on any other day, but I watched this movie to take notes exactly on the 4th of July, and that made me a little mellow. This night game then transitions into a regular day game, quite seamlessly in fact, and we get treated to some more of Benny's fancy footwork. Now, this is actually one of the few nitpicks I have with the movie. Whenever Benny is pinned between bases, he always runs back and forth a few times, getting the guys at base into a certain rhythm where they throw to wherever he's headed. Once he knows they're in that rhythm, and preferably when the ball is at home plate, he stops running, and instead sidesteps just fast enough to make it look like he's running all the way back to third. The guy at home base throws, and then Benny is able to close the distance and hit home without any problems. Now the move itself, and the fact that Benny can pull it off, is pretty amazing. It's a great union of physical ability and, as nerdy as this might sound, tactical skill. The problem is that he does it all the time, and nobody ever picks up on it. In their defense, I guess, whenever you're in an active sport or any physical activity, people tend to fall back on their basic or trained instincts, meaning that they don't always pay attention to the finer details. This reasoning is also helped by the previously established fact that the rest of the team treats the game as, well, a game, while Benny is totally committed to it. meaning he's the only one who would even bother to think of moves like this one, let alone notice them. So again, it's just a nitpick of mine. But this Sandlot game is interrupted by the arrival of another team. I don't even think I'd call these new guys the neighborhood punks because, well, they're not tough enough to be punks. For context, these jackasses stroll up to the Sandlot riding on what at the time were high-quality bikes. They waltz up to them in the same way an actual biker gang might in a more serious movie. So you quickly get the impression that these are spoiled kids and also spoiled rich kids. First, by the fact that they have their own custom uniforms for their, well, make-believe neighborhood team, and then by their jackass attitude. It's also conveyed very quickly that there's already an existing rivalry between the two teams. All the guys at the Sandlot, barring Smalls, get real angry when these rich boys stroll along, with Ham being the most visibly angry. We find out why when the rich kids diss the rest of the team, but single out Ham when they call them all
Bunch of rejects and fat kids.
What's funny, though, is that even though the rich brats diss the rest of the team, they're perfectly willing to build up Benny's talents. Because again, he's just that good, and even turds like them are aware of this. But my favorite part of this scene is Ham himself. When they call him fat, and he is rather heavy, he doesn't cry, he doesn't say he'll tell his mama, he just trash talks right back and challenges them to play right here and now to see which team is really the best. The rich brats, of course, say no to this and keep on trash talking, until Ham says,
You play ball like a girl!
which elicits complete silence from everyone present until the main rich kid breaks it by accepting their challenge. And no, I'm not going to talk about the gender politics involved in this statement. I already did that for the pool scene, and I'm sure there are countless threads on social media covering this one line, with varying knowledge of the movie and the context of both its story and production. So I wish you luck in finding at least 2 coherent sentences in that entire mess. Once the challenge game starts, and it's on the rich kids field, we have Ham once again asserting his dominance. He's the umpire for when the rich kids are up to bat, and he trash talks them so bad that they can't even focus on the game.
You know, if my dog was as ugly as you, I'd shave his butt and tell him to walk backwards.
It's beautiful. And the rest of the team performs just as well. The Sandlot boys win, and in any other sports movie, especially a kid-centric one, this would probably be the most important part of the film. But here, it's not. And it's just another tale of the kids' summer adventures, in fact. Which is kind of cool, because the movie doesn't just focus on a singular aspect or plot point right away. Instead, it takes the time to allow you to connect with the characters through their various misadventures, and even lets the world breathe so you can acclimate to everything. Nothing feels rushed, and even though the action of the film proceeds at a steady pace, I'd still describe watching this movie as a very comfy experience. After this recent victory, the guys go over to a local carnival to celebrate, with the narration for this scene welcoming us in by saying,
And we did the stupidest thing any of us had ever done.
This scene is mainly just another throwaway joke scene. Benny pays for all their tickets, and Bertram pulls out something special to celebrate the occasion. A big bag of chewing tobacco. Now, even when I was a little kid, I knew that chewing tobacco was not the heaviest thing you could take as far as rec substances were concerned. But these are still a bunch of dumb preteens, so not only is it heavy stuff for them, they don't actually know how to use it. So they each take a handful, way too much to take at once, considering the fact that Bertram also lays into a piece that's about as big as some high-quality beef jerky, and then they proceed to go on the rides. The overuse of the tobacco, which I'm pretty sure a few of them actually just swallowed instead of chewed on, mixes with the speed and dizzying spin of the ride and gets all the little dorks sick. So much so that they all collectively vomit during the ride's maximum speed and spin. It's not a pleasant time for them, but it's definitely funny for us to watch. And it also reminds us that the movie is as much about the kids' misadventures as it is about their most happy. The scene does have one narrative use, though. When Smalls asks what the chewing tobacco is, the guys once again bust on his chops for his nerdy ignorance. They even joke about how he probably doesn't know who the Great Bambino is. For them, this is just a fun callback to a more awkward time, but we can see from Smalls' face and tone that he still has no idea who they're talking about. The next scene sets up the actual plot of the movie, finally. Smalls' mom is taking Bill to the airport as he has to go on a business trip. It's a small moment, but it also functions as a testament to this film's ability to handle continuity, at least in its narrative. Mom looks Smalls over and notices that he's a bit disoriented and pale. He of course brushes it off with the usual, "I'm fine, Mom." But we ourselves know that he's still sick from the tobacco. This is a small thing, I know, but not every movie is able to get these kind of details right, and the fact that a low-budget B-movie from the 90s did is equal parts hilarious and depressing. As he leaves, Bill gives Scott the old, "You're the man of the house while I'm gone" line. Yes, it's very cliched, and was even so when this movie was made, but it functions well here. We again see that even though Smalls and Bill don't quite get each other yet, they're trying to change that, especially Bill. He even says that they'll try their hand at catch again, which is nice of him, but also tells us that Smalls hasn't been all that talkative about his friends or his growing skills at the game. He probably hasn't even told any of this to his mother, since she doesn't seem to know either. So yes, the breach is healing, but it's still there. Once Bill leaves, the scene cuts to the guys leaving from the drugstore and going over to the Sandlot. The narration jokes a little about how they all universally quit the hard stuff. It's also another moment for the narration to once again talk about the pickle, or problem, that we've been promised since the beginning of the movie. We even get a shot that focuses in on an advertisement for dog food just as he says this. It's not the most subtle hint, but that and the Bambino reference in the previous scene at least warms us up for what comes next. During this next game, Benny is up to bat and he hits the incoming ball, managing to smash the guts out of it. Everyone on the team is amazed, and the event is treated with respect and reverence by even the movie itself. They even start playing this tense and dramatic music as everyone gets into place before the hit. There's also a slow-mo sequence where Nunez gets up to pitch the ball Benny busts up. Once all that happens, Benny alone is unhappy with the event, because now they don't have a ball to play with. And that's a recurring feature in this character. Benny knows he's good, sure, but his skill is secondary to his love of the game, and he never comes across as very arrogant at any point in the movie. He's just a kid who's committed himself body and soul to this one great goal. Similar to the first game he was welcomed to, Smalls tries to be helpful and says that he has a ball back at home that they can play with. The problem is that the ball he's thinking of is the one in Bill's office. The one that we know is signed by Babe Ruth himself. Now, Smalls knows full well that what he's doing is bad, but I can at least say that it's the kind of bad or stupidity that only an honest kid would have. I mean, think about it. How many coming-of-age dramas are there where the protagonist or some other character steals money from their parents or lies about a romantic relationship and ad infinitum drug addictions, and then compare that to this kid who just wants to play ball with his friends? He's still being wrong, yes, he's still being an idiot, definitely, but he's also just being a kid, as opposed to a sociopath. Once he gets back to the field, everyone is so happy that Smalls was able to get the ball that they have him get up to bat for it. And in a perfectly executed bout of irony, Smalls bats his first home run right into the backyard where the beast is. He's, of course, completely panicking at this point, and it takes the others a little while to actually ask him why. He is distraught because he stole that ball from his stepdad, and the others are understanding why he's that upset. They also start asking him why the ball is so important, and eventually he stumbles into telling them that the ball was in fact signed by Babe Ruth. This knowledge motivates the whole team to actually try and scale the fence to get the ball back, only for them to get scared away by the Beast. Smalls is finally told that the Great Bambino and Babe Ruth are one and the same, and he realizes the enormity of his screw-up. Luckily, though, the guys all get together to help him out. They even pitch in to buy a new ball, which is going to be used as a decoy for the actual Ruth ball until Bill gets back from his business trip. When Smalls goes to put that ball in place, his mom walks in on him, though he's once again able to brush this off as something completely benign. She then delivers a rapid series of bombshells about Bill's history with that particular baseball. The biggest one being that Bill's own dad gave it to him, and that it would be very likely that Bill would give it to his own son, i.e. Smalls himself. This makes the kid sad, but also doubly determined to get the ball back. What follows is a series of increasingly ludicrous but also rather ingenious attempts to extract the Ruth ball from the Beast's yard. Before that gets underway, though, Smalls is rational enough to make the suggestion that they just knock on the front door and ask Mr. Myrtle if he could help them get the ball. Of course, the best is the first to shoot the idea down, citing that Myrtle was the one who made the Beast eat that kid. And no, this kid is never given a name, which is yet another sign of the story's BS status. So, they go through in a whole montage of the extraction attempts. They start out small, trying to get the Ruth ball by edging it closer to their side of the fence with long sticks, first made of wood, and then a long metal pole with a bucket attached to the end of it. Those fail, and these scenes are played up like highlights from an old horror movie. You don't even see what happens to these things. The Beast just roars, the kids scream, and then we see what remains of their tools looking like they were mauled by a velociraptor. Then the kids start getting more sophisticated. They bring an elongated vacuum machine pipe and feed it into the yard from a treehouse overlooking it. And they try to vacuum the ball into said treehouse. The Beast manages to pinch the pipe shut, causing a chain reaction where the machines just explode. And this scene plays out like a war movie, where the guys even run from the house as fast as they can and dive to the ground while the explosion happens. Next, they try and lower someone right into the yard via a pulley system and cables, specifically Yeye, which is why I said he was one of the more gutsy members of the team. The plan actually succeeds, though, and Yeye is able to get the ball, only for the Beast to get right up into his face, though we only ever see the dog's teeth, and Yeye starts to get scared. The guys try and pull him out, but the pulley system breaks, so they have to pull him up straight by hand, and Yeye gets so terrified that he drops the ball as he's getting pulled up. There's one final attempt, though, using the erector set from earlier. And this is a pretty cool machine. It's a remote-controlled catapult, and the plan is obviously to get the ball and then launch said ball over to their side of the fence. Now, what's cool about this machine, and again, it's just a small detail, is the end of its arm. That's the spoon-looking section from where you launch whatever. The arm actually splits in half and then comes together with the spoon coming under the Ruth ball so that it gets picked up under the thin flat of the arm instead of its cupped edges. This is way more efficient than just trying to scoop it up directly. And the machine works. They manage to launch the ball from its place on the ground until the Beast, once again looking like a monster dog, jumps up and catches the ball in midair. This is, of course, the low point of the movie because the kids have done their best and now they're out of options. The narration even talks about how Smalls is convinced that his life is over at this point. even has a nightmare about a giant baseball signed by Babe Ruth falling from the sky and hammering him into the dirt. But we never get to see that dream, and that's because it's just a lead-in to Benny's dream, which starts with Benny awakening to the feeling of his entire room shaking, which only ends once his room door opens and a great white light is revealed from which emerges Babe Ruth himself. He's even in black and white until he walks into the room proper, and like many a dream sequence with an idol figure, Ruth tells Benny that he just needs to face his fears, even says that he just needs to go over the fence and get the ball on his own. There's a few more typical lines about seizing the chance of greatness when it comes, and Ruth leaves with one final line.
Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.
We've seen this kind of scene in countless other movies, but this one has a few special touches. First, we have Benny being genuinely afraid that he can't do what he needs to do. This is the most basic kind of conflict for a hero to have before he goes out and does his heroic adventures, but that approach is also getting lost in a few stories. Even in those stories, though, you usually have that kind of conflict in an inexperienced character who's been comparatively incapable since the beginning of the movie or story. So the scene with the mentor would be the moment where they finally come into their full potential. With this scene, the roadmap is the same, but not the details. Benny has been the idol of this entire movie. Everyone loves him, and as far as we can tell, he deserves every bit of that praise. So when he's scared, when he says he doesn't know if he can do something, it's more impactful. It shows his human side, it ups the stakes of the action, and still keeps Benny as a capable character, though. Again, this is basic stuff, but it's well done, and not every movie can do that much. Next cool part of this scene is the way Ruth carries himself and talks. He doesn't view himself as a big deal, he doesn't parade his skills or achievements, and he's very casual about his fame. Benny even uses a bunch of the nicknames that the kids have been lavishing upon the man, and Ruth just treats them as that, kids' nicknames. He waves it off and just gets right to his point. The reason why this is important is because it's the same way Benny acts about his own skills, which is more concrete, yet not overt evidence that Benny does in fact have the makings of a sports legend. The last really good touch, though, is at the end, when Ruth, or his ghost or whatever, leaves. On his way out, Ruth takes one of Benny's baseball cards, and actually asks if he can keep it, even admitting that he doesn't know why. Benny says sure, and we're shown that the card is one of Hank Aaron, who is the African-American player who would go on to break Ruth's own record. Once the dream sequence is done, Benny rushes to wake up the rest of the team and gets ready to jump over the fence. He even buys some high-quality sports shoes to give him an edge. There's some obligatory, "you don't have to do this" lines from Smalls, and then Benny makes the jump. The movie wastes no time in setting this up as the final showdown. In fact, once Benny climbs over the fence, the movie starts playing showdown music right out of classic westerns. And the Beast himself comes out of his cave, which is just a regular doghouse. In fact, the Beast himself looks just like a normal dog. An English Mastiff, if you want to get technical. The Beast belches out the Ruth Bowl onto the dirt, like throwing the gauntlet in a medieval duel. But Benny makes the first move and is just fast enough to reach the ball, grab it, and then jump back over the fence, only for the Beast to have broken its chains, jump the fence completely, and then go right after him. What follows next is a rather derivative chase sequence, but one that has its charm. The action is confined to this small hometown, but the film pulls out all the stops to make it a sequence worth watching. Streets are trashed, and people scream and panic as Benny runs all over town with the Beast at his heels and the Sandlot boys not far behind. There's even one funny moment where they run through a movie theater that's playing the original Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr., and the Beast bursts through the screen just as Lon Chaney is undergoing his transformation. But the chase does end. They all circle back to the Sandlot, then he jumps over the fence again, and tired from the chase, the Beast tries to go for the easiest way through the fence. The Beast digs at it just enough for the entire fence to get undermined, and it falls on him. Once the dust settles, quite literally, we see that the dog is trapped beneath the fence and is whining in pain. Benny even feels bad for the little dog. But Smalls, in a pretty big reversal of roles, is the only one with the courage to run right up and try and pull the fence off the poor mutt. Benny follows after, and the two succeed in saving the dog. And much to everyone's surprise, except perhaps the audience, the Beast is very grateful for being helped out, and is not all that much of a monster. He even takes the boys to the hole where he's kept every ball that's been lost over the fence up till now. And I can't help but think about old fairy tales about heroes conquering dragons and taking their treasure. But now that they've got what they've wanted, the boys feel obligated to explain what happened to Mr. Myrtle, the Beast's owner. When the man himself comes to his door, we're treated to a few surprises. One, he's not at all as he's described in the campy horror story. Two, he's blind, so the dog is probably his seeing eye dog. And three, he's played by James Earl Jones, which is always wonderful. When they tell him that they came over the fence for the ball, he's not only perfectly fine with their story, he asks them why they didn't just knock on the front door, as he would have been perfectly happy to help. The team then has the entirely reasonable reaction of getting pissed off at the best, and James Earl Jones is of course amused by all this, since it's just a bunch of kids being kids. He might have had a few moments just like this, for all we know. But there was still a big commotion that went on, so James Earl Jones brings Benny and Smalls into his house to talk about the whole situation. They tell him about the ball they came for being signed by Babe Ruth, and Jones casually asks,
George signed this?
The significance of this supposedly random old man referring to Babe Ruth on a first-name basis is completely lost on the boys. It's even lost on them when he walks over to a collection of baseball trophies and souvenirs reminiscent of Bill's. They even scoff a bit when Earl Jones offers to trade them the ball he's brought from his collection for the Ruth ball, which has been mauled by the Beast, whose name is Hercules. But the mocking stops once Earl Jones shows that the ball has been signed by the entire roster of the 1927's Yankees team, a murderer's row ball. Turns out that Earl Jones is in fact a former ball player with a very rich history in the sport. The entire room, in fact, is surrounded with photos of the people he played with or was friends with, one of those being a photo of him with Babe Ruth. In fact, James Earl Jones was so good at the sport that he was close to breaking Ruth's record. But he suffered an accident when a fastball went right into his head and rendered him blind, which ended his career. Both Benny and Smalls are humbled by this and try and refuse the offer of the murderer's row ball. It just doesn't seem right to take it from an old veteran who loved the game as much as he did, especially just to cover up for Smalls' own mistake. But James Earl Jones evens this all out by giving them one more condition. They'll just hold on to the ball, and in return, they'll visit and talk with the game every so often, like once a week. Hercules even ends up becoming the team's mascot with the painted-over jersey and everything. We are then treated to the ending narration and sequence. Bill is of course thrilled with the murderer's row ball, as well as the effort his stepson put into retrieving the Ruth ball. But he's still mad about the kid breaking into his office and stealing it in the first place. But after a week of being grounded, both father and son get into the swing of a real relationship. So much so that Bill enjoys teaching Smalls the finer points of the game, and Smalls himself has no trouble calling him Dad from then on. It's then explained that the team managed to enjoy a few more good years together, but that each of them left one after another for various reasons. Yeah, went into military school and became an innovator in bungee jumping. Bertram just disappeared, with the narration telling us,
Bertram got really into the 60s, and no one ever saw him again.
the Timmons brothers became construction moguls after they designed and owned mini-malls. The Best married Wendy Peppercorn and had 9 kids together, while also owning and running the drugstore that we've seen the boys come from since the beginning of the movie. Ham Porter becomes a pro wrestler, styling himself as the Great Hambino. Still doing his best impression of the genuine article, apparently. Nunes pursues the game as a career for a while, before settling down with a family and coaching a little league team that his own sons play on. Smalls was the last to leave the neighborhood, and Hercules died after 199 years of life. In dog years. Benny gained a reputation after his tussle with Hercules, especially for his speed, and that earned him a nickname that would follow him right into his professional career, that name being Benny the Jet Rodriguez. Our final scene is of Benny playing in the major leagues and winning a game for the Dodgers. Smalls watches all of this from the booth we saw earlier in the movie, and is in fact the sportscaster for this particular game. We then get a final shot of the 3 balls from the movie sitting over Smalls' desk. First the fake Ruth ball, then the mauled Ruth ball, and then the murderer's row ball, which is held in a tight plastic container, before we finally end the movie with a group shot of the whole team at the Sandlot. This is a really good movie. Yes, it's one out of 100 other childhood adventure movies, but you know what makes it one of my favorites? It's fun. It doesn't try to be artsy or profound, and it doesn't try to be edgy or unnecessarily graphic. It's a simple movie, and so it focuses on presenting that simple story in the best way that it can. For those of you cinematic moralists out there, there's no cussing, violence, or mature themes that your average 11 to 13-year-old kid hasn't already thought of or isn't actively doing. What makes this perfectly reasonable, though, is that it's natural. None of the kids go through any harsh personal drama that makes us hate them or pity them. They're normal kids making grand adventures out of normal events, which is a rare thing in this climate. And through narrowing its focus into this simple structure, the movie is actually free to tinker with how it's presented. There's a running theme of previous ignorances and preconceptions being broken down, much like many other adolescent-type stories. Whether it's Smalls and his status with his friends, Babe Ruth himself, or Myrtle and Hercules, many a childhood preconception or fable is done away with. Like I said, lots of adventure movies favor this tactic, but where most of them focus on breaking childish fantasies in order to force the protagonists into supposedly harsh adult truths, The Sandlot rewards our boys for being brave and shows them the various benefits that can come from taking a risk, or even pulls the rug out from under them and shows that there was nothing for them to fear to begin with. It presents the very strange idea that childhood is not an illusion broken by the harshness of maturity, but a foundation for us to become greater things, maybe even heroes and legends. Or childhood can just be a collection of fond memories of summertime adventures, which motivates us to live even better. The biggest of these preconceptions is obviously Hercules, or the Beast himself. We get introduced to him as if he were a monster straight out of an old horror movie, even with a Jaws-like progression where we just get brief glimpses at a time, or even just the sound of his growl. Until finally, we build up to his big reveal. Once that happens, though, we figure out pretty quickly that he's just a normal dog, and that most of his previously terrifying moments make total sense now. He chews up sticks, takes baseballs, and chases after people because that's what dogs do. In fact, it's very obvious that he treated most of the action as a game. The supposedly terrifying moment where he jumps up and catches the ball in midair is just the sort of thing that a normal dog would do. And it becomes really funny when you stop and think about it, much like many a childhood experience that is looked back upon in adulthood. The camera work in the movie isn't too bad either, I guess. There's nothing too fancy since it's a low-budget flick, but you still have some good shots which go hand in hand with the narrative, and into another thing I really like about this movie. I've talked on and on about continuity in this film, and that's because it's descending into a lost art. Showing the passage of time within a long-running narrative should be an essential or just basic concern, but quite a few movies in recent memory have cast that worry aside, and so the way The Sandlot executes continuity is all the more noticeable. There's always a lead-in to the next scene or story beat, and every beat builds from the previous ones. My favorite example is when the carnival scene transitions into the sequence where Smalls steals and then loses his dad's ball, because it's actually 3 build-ups in one. First, we have Smalls being unknowingly dissed for not knowing who Babe Ruth is. This brings up Smalls' continued ignorance, meaning that it's a problem that's ongoing and will come up later. Second, Mom notices that Smalls is sick because he's still recovering from the tobacco, which gives us a good idea of how much time has passed between each sequence, and cements the importance that an otherwise throwaway scene has on the movie entire. Finally, we get a little shot of an advertisement for dog food, warming us up for the confrontation with the beast. Again, these aren't the most subtle touches, perhaps, but they cement the breathing and natural air of the story and make sure that no part of it comes across as unnecessary. The acting is pretty good, too. Even after watching this movie with seasoned eyes, I can't help but get invested in these kids. The stakes they face aren't even that high in reality, but to a kid, they're practically apocalyptic. And the whole team sells that idea. Obviously, Benny and Smalls are the big standouts, and they sell friendship and confidence and fear and those respective moments very well. My favorites out of the team, though, are Ham Porter, whose 60s trash talk is often quoted in many a pop culture circle, even if most people don't know where it is they're quoting from, and Squints, who I've called the best throughout this entire review. He's dramatic about all the things he does and feels, and you can't help but love his energy. He also gets in the most trouble, and that just adds to the action. Dennis Leary and Karen Allen are 2 out of the main adult characters in this movie. I'll get to James Earl Jones in a moment, but we'll focus on these 2 for now. Karen Allen is the typical caring mother, and she plays the part just like that. But she's also a breath of fresh air, in that she had more to offer her son besides "follow your heart" and other nonsense. She talks up his qualities like you would expect a good parent to do, but she also encourages him to grow and change for his own sake, which is what you would expect of a good parent, but doesn't seem to be a hit with media at the moment. Dennis Leary has just about as little screen time, but he still does his job. He's a man who's trying to be a dad to a kid who isn't his own, and who at first he can't really relate to. He captures both the awkwardness of his situation, the desire to change it, and some of the frustration that come when he's unable to do it right away. This performance is also a little funny to me, because it might be the only role I've seen Dennis Leary in where he doesn't go off on an angry rant about whatever's annoying him at the time. Anyone who's seen Dennis Leary in any movie ever should watch this and be amazed that he is in fact capable of not being loud and pissed off. So yeah, the adults are good. As much as I love this movie, though, there are still a few problems. The narrations are essential for both the context of each story sequence and the ranging effects of unseen story beats throughout the narrative. Hence the need for the narration. I'd be lying, though, if I didn't feel that it got repetitive after a while. There are actually moments where I'm certain the audience would understand the situation perfectly without the support of the narration, even if they're on the younger side. For instance, we're told that things are awkward between Smalls and Bill via narration, but then we get a scene of them 2 seconds later where we see that they're awkward with each other. And it's easy to tell that. A little gripe, but not unwarranted. Another gripe is the effects. There's not a bunch of CGI nonsense, obviously, but those effects that the movie does have reflect its lower budget. I don't particularly think that this should affect anyone's enjoyment, but I also know that people take such things into consideration. The other is the issue of time and place. This movie is centered around the 1960s in America, and so reflects and makes use of the culture of the time. Some people may have trouble identifying with it. Luckily, the movie does a good job of introducing us to a lot of the norms in 1960s America by using Smalls' own ignorance as opportunities for the other characters to explain the situation. And for the most part, it feels rather natural, and is yet another reason for the essential nature of the narration. My biggest gripe, though, is a personal one, and it's James Earl Jones himself. Specifically, that there's not enough of him. He's always wonderful in whatever role he's in, even this one where he has only the barest hint of screen time. But the reason I'm annoyed with this is less about this particular movie, and more about current-day problems. About a year ago, I was hanging out with some of my college friends. We were playing some game about doing voice impressions, and I was up to judge. Now, these people are nerds like me, film buffs, varying degrees of artsiness, and they have a general interest in pop culture. With this in mind, I thought it would be a simple matter to say, alright, give me your best impression of James Earl Jones. And I don't know if you can even imagine how crushed I was when they all collectively said, "Who's that?" I was devastated. James Earl Jones voiced Darth Vader and Mufasa. He was Admiral Greer, the mentor to Jack Ryan in the 90s run of movies. He was Eddie Murphy's dad in Coming to America, one of the funniest movies ever made.
Son, please. I am more than the exalted ruler of this land and the master of all I survey. I am also a concerned dad.
And he has a long and prestigious stage career to boot. Watch clips of his performance in Fences, and you'll be blown away. James Earl Jones is a prolific actor. I won't say he's better than legends like, say, Judi Dench or Ian McKellen, but he's definitely on their level, and he's definitely worth at least 5 DiCaprios, and since I'm feeling generous, let's say 20.7 Larsons. James Earl Jones has left an everlasting mark on the arts, and I wish he got more acknowledgement for it. I guess he is an EGOT, winner of an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony, so he does have plenty of recognition, just not enough. Yet with all my petty grievances, I can't ignore a very decisive fact. I love this movie, and I'm not even a baseball fan. Yes, the movie's main plot point is not even a topic of interest to me. But I love the film all the same. The characters are lovable, their adventures are just crazy enough to be exciting, and even though I'm not a fan of the sport, I'm able to understand the significance that the game has in the characters' lives, as well as US culture in general. Above all, I love this movie because of its positive message. Yes, it's not the first or last movie of its kind, perhaps. It's simple, it's cheap, and it's direct. But as a consequence, it's also focused, entertaining, and strangely profound when you look at it with a more discerning eye. This is a good movie, and more people ought to watch it. Well, that was the first and admittedly bloated review on Retrospective Rants, as well as the first in our series of 90s hits. Tune in next time when we tackle a television icon, a classic sitcom possessed of unsurpassed wit and all manner of pompous misadventures, along with something about tossed salad and scrambled eggs. Thanks for listening in, and have a good one.